The sun hung low over the glassy lake, casting golden reflections across the wooden dock. A breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and a hint of wood smoke. Inside the cabin, nestled among the New England woods, the Brady family gathered around the fireplace. The moment was simple, ordinary even, but it was the kind that held the potential for something lasting. Benjamin Rain Brady sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through an old photo album he'd found tucked in a dusty cabinet. His brow furrowed with curiosity as he lingered on a picture of a younger Tom Brady. No Super Bowl rings, no fame, just a boy beside an older man, both smiling with fishing rods in hand. "Dad," Ben asked, lifting his eyes from the page, "what was that thing you and Grandpa used to do every summer, the thing with the letters?" The room fell silent. Tom Brady, seated across from his son, felt his heart skip. He hadn't thought about that tradition in years, not since before the media frenzy, the contracts, the parades. He cleared his throat, glancing at Giselle, who met his gaze with a quiet nod, but he didn't answer. Not yet. The fire crackled, filling the space between them with its warm glow. Ben waited, unsure if he'd crossed a line. Giselle placed a gentle hand on her son's shoulder, her touch both grounding and encouraging. "It's okay to ask," she said softly. Tom looked down at his hands, calloused still from years of gripping a football, but now trembling slightly under the weight of something else. Regret, maybe. Or fear. If you're feeling the pull of this story already, take a second to subscribe to our channel. There's more coming, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. When Tom finally spoke, his voice was low, thoughtful. "That was a long time ago." Ben nodded, sensing the weight in his father's tone. "But it meant something, didn't it?" Tom smiled faintly, but the sadness in his eyes betrayed the smile. "Yeah," he whispered. "It did." Outside, the wind shifted. Leaves danced across the deck. Inside, an unspoken tension settled, the kind born not of anger, but of distance. Not physical, but emotional. Tom stood, walking over to the window, staring out at the lake. The view hadn't changed. The water still shimmered under the same sky. But something in him was stirring. A memory, buried deep, now surfacing. "I used to write letters to my dad every summer," he began, still facing the glass. "He'd write back. We'd hide them in the cabin like secrets waiting to be found." Ben's eyes lit up. "That's actually really cool. Why'd you stop?" Tom turned slowly. The boy's question struck deeper than he expected. Why did he stop? The answer wasn't simple. Life, career, fame, or had he simply forgotten what mattered most? He sat back down, this time closer to Ben. "I guess I got busy. Things changed. I didn't think you'd care about stuff like that." "But I do," Ben said quickly, almost too quickly. "I mean, I didn't even know about it until today, but I do." Tom looked at his son, truly looked at him. The same eyes, the same quiet strength. Maybe even the same longing he once felt as a boy, hoping to understand the man he called Dad. And in that moment, with the fire crackling and the sun slipping behind the trees, Tom Brady realized this wasn't just a question. It was an invitation. Tom didn't sleep much that night. Long after Ben had gone to bed, he sat by the dying fire, his mind wandering through years he'd locked away. He hadn't thought of that summer in decades, the one just before his life took a sharp turn into fame and pressure. He remembered the sound of cicadas outside the cabin window, the feel of his dad's old flannel shirt draped around his shoulders, and the soft rustle of a handwritten letter being slid across a worn wooden table. Back then, the tradition had been simple but sacred. Every summer, Tom and his father would write letters to each other, not about football or grades or chores, but about what they were thinking, what they feared, what they dreamed. Sometimes they were funny, sometimes serious, always honest. It was a silent bond, one that didn't need big declarations or grand gestures. Tom closed his eyes and saw his dad's handwriting again, strong, slightly slanted, filled with encouragement and quiet wisdom. It had shaped him more than he ever realized. But somewhere along the way, that voice had been drowned out. First came college ball, then the NFL draft, and suddenly life became a blur of schedules, interviews, and expectations. Every minute was accounted for. Every word was scrutinized. There was no space left for quiet traditions. The letters stopped, and then his father passed away. Tom rubbed his hands over his face, guilt rising like a tide. He'd never shared that tradition with Ben, never even told him about it. How many summers had slipped by while he chased glory on the field? In the morning, Ben found his dad at the dock staring out over the lake. "You okay?" Tom nodded slowly. "Just thinking." Ben hesitated. Was it a good tradition? Tom looked at him, this young man who bore his name and so much more. "It was the best part of every summer. I don't know why I let it go." Ben sat beside him, legs dangling over the edge. "I think sometimes we forget stuff. But that doesn't mean we can't remember again." Tom turned to his son, surprised by the clarity in his voice. "You're right." Back inside the cabin, Giselle moved through the kitchen quietly, watching her son and his father from the window. She remembered years of trying to create space for them to connect. Little trips, dinners, questions asked and often unanswered. Tom had always been present, but a part of him was unreachable. Football demanded so much, and when it didn't, he often didn't know how to be still. But now, for the first time, he seemed still. Later that afternoon, Tom picked up the photo album again. He studied the picture Ben had shown him, himself and his father side by side. He touched the edges of the page as if it might bring the moment back. Ben hovered nearby. "Do you miss him?" Tom didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice cracked. "Every day." There was a pause. Then Ben said, "I don't really know what it's like, but sometimes I feel like I miss you even when you're here." The words hit Tom like a blow to the chest, gentle, honest, undeniable. He didn't speak, just reached out and pulled his son into a hug. No speeches, no explanations, just an embrace, heavy with everything said and unsaid. Outside, the lake shimmered under the afternoon sun. Inside, something long dormant was starting to stir. That evening, after dinner, Tom and Ben returned to the living room. The fire had been rekindled, casting a soft orange glow across the floorboards. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was thoughtful, full of possibilities. Tom leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, fingers laced together. "I want to tell you something," he began, voice calm but steady. "About Grandpa." Ben nodded, eyes locked on his father. Tom took a breath. He wasn't loud. "He didn't tell me what to do or how to live, but every summer in this very cabin we'd write letters, just one each. I'd write mine on the first night. He'd write his before we left. Then we'd hide them and read them the next year." Ben blinked. "Like a time capsule." Tom smiled. "Exactly. It wasn't about advice. It was about sharing where we were in life. Being honest, without interruption. I think it made me a better man, even if I didn't realize it then." There was a pause. The fire popped. Ben looked down, then said softly, "Can we do it?" Tom tilted his head. "You want to?" Ben gave a small shrug. "I don't know if I'd be good at it, but it sounds important." Tom nodded slowly. "It's not about being good, it's about being real." He rose and disappeared down the hall. Moments later, he returned with a wooden box, aged with brass hinges slightly rusted. He set it gently on the table and opened it. Inside were neatly folded pages, some yellowed with age, others barely creased. Tom lifted one, unfolding it carefully. "This was the last letter he ever wrote me," he said. Ben leaned in as Tom began to read. "Tommy, if you're reading this, then another year's gone by. Maybe it was your best season yet, maybe not. But remember this, trophies gather dust. Who you are when no one's watching, that's what matters. Make space for what can't be measured. I love you, always. Dad." Tom's voice faltered at the end. He folded the letter and placed it back inside the box. Ben was quiet. Then, with unusual certainty, he said, "We should start now." Tom looked at him, surprised. "You mean today?" "Why not?" Ben replied. "If it mattered that much to you, Maybe it'll matter to me. Tom considered this. All right, he said, then added, but one rule, honesty. No edits, no filters, just write what's real. Ben agreed. They dug through drawers until they found some old stationery, creased but usable. They didn't write that night, but they made a plan. Tomorrow each would write one letter. Not to impress, not to perform, just to connect. Before going to bed, Ben turned back to Tom. Do you think Grandpa would have liked me? Tom's eyes softened. He would have loved you, Ben. You've got his quiet strength. Ben smiled faintly, and for the first time in a long time, Tom felt something shift inside. Not relief, not pride. Something deeper, maybe the beginning of healing. They didn't speak much more that night. They didn't need to. In the quiet, Tom stared at the wooden box, fingers tracing its corners. The weight of his father's words, once heavy with absence, now felt like a bridge between generations. And just like that, a new tradition began, not as a tribute to the past, but as a promise to the future. The following summer came quietly. No headlines, no press, just a flight to the same cabin, this time with only Tom and Ben. Giselle had smiled when they left, handing them both a packed lunch and a handwritten note for each. Make it count, she'd said. The drive up was filled with music and small talk, nothing too deep, but enough to feel different, lighter. Tom noticed Ben looking out the window a lot, maybe imagining what the trip would hold. He didn't press. Some things needed space. When they arrived, the cabin greeted them like an old friend. The air smelled like pine and lake water. Inside, the furniture hadn't moved. The box of letters still sat on the same shelf. They unpacked, made sandwiches, and settled in. That evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, Ben reached into his backpack and pulled out an envelope. I wrote it last week, he said. Wanted to get it right. Tom blinked, surprised. Can I read it now? Ben nodded. That's the point, right? Tom took the letter, unfolding it carefully. He read it silently at first, eyes scanning the words with increasing stillness. Then, halfway through, he stopped and read aloud. Dear Dad, I don't know how to be perfect, and I don't really care about being famous. I care about knowing who you are when it's just us. I care about not missing my chance to really be your son, before time makes that harder. I don't need touchdowns or trophies. I just need truth. I hope this letter helps us start something real. Tom's hands trembled. The letter dropped slightly in his grip, but he didn't speak right away. He looked at Ben, who was trying not to fidget, and then said, This is one of the most honest things anyone's ever written to me. Ben shrugged, trying to play it off. It's just a letter. No, Tom said firmly. It's not just a letter. It's what I've needed to hear for years. Ben looked away, blinking fast. Tom stood and walked over to the mantel. He took down a folded page from earlier that morning, one he'd written before they left. He handed it to Ben without a word. Ben opened it slowly. Dear Ben, you are more than I ever deserved, and everything I needed. I missed too many chances to show you who I am beyond the uniform. I was scared you wouldn't want that version of me, but this letter and this moment proves you do. I promise I'm here now, not as a legend, just as your dad. Ben folded the letter back up and placed it in his lap. Neither spoke for a long while. The only sound was the soft rustle of leaves outside. Finally, Ben said, So now what? Tom smiled. Now we write again next summer. One letter, one truth, every year. Ben nodded. Deal. Tom sat beside him. You know, I cried in games. Not often, but it happened. Alone, in locker rooms, never let anyone see it. Ben turned to him. Why? Because I thought being strong meant hiding what hurts. Tom wiped his eyes. Ben reached over and said, You don't have to do that now. Tom let the tears fall. For the first time, not as a symbol or athlete, but as a father, fully seen. And next to him, Ben smiled, knowing this summer would never be forgotten. The next morning, the cabin buzzed with quiet energy. Giselle arrived just after breakfast, greeted by the scent of fresh coffee and the sight of her husband and son sitting at the table, laughing over an inside joke. It was small, but it was new. and unmistakably theirs. She hugged them both, sensing the shift immediately. Something had settled between them, something unspoken but solid. The letters were tucked safely away, but their impact lingered in every glance and word exchanged. Later that afternoon, Ben suggested an idea. What if we made a memory box? Not just for us, but for the future, for whoever comes next. Tom raised an eyebrow. You mean, like, for your kids someday? Ben shrugged. Maybe. Or even just us looking back, like Grandpa's letters, but with photos, notes, stuff that matters. Giselle lit up. I love that. Tom looked around the room, the same cabin that once held his childhood, now holding something entirely new. All right. Let's do it. They gathered mementos, photos from that summer, the 2 letters from the day before, a small stone from the lake's edge that Ben said looked like a heart, and one of Giselle's notes, the one she'd sent with their lunch. She smiled as she added it to the box. Just a reminder that moms are part of the story too. They laughed together, the kind of laughter that comes when walls have finally fallen and love can breathe. That evening they placed the box beneath the old bookshelf, hidden but marked with a carved B. Not for Brady, for Ben. As they sat on the porch, watching the sunset bleed across the sky, Tom reached for his son's hand. You've taught me something I didn't know I needed to learn, he said. Ben didn't look away. You taught me too, just not the way you thought you would. Tom smiled. That's the point, isn't it? We think legacy is about what we do, but maybe it's about what we leave behind that can keep growing. They sat in silence for a while, the lake shimmering in the last light of day. The next morning, as they packed up, Ben tucked his copy of the letter into his backpack. I'm going to use part of it for my English assignment. We're supposed to write about something personal. Tom chuckled. That's one way to get an A. Ben grinned. Or maybe just be real. Giselle kissed Tom on the cheek. You did good. I did late, he replied. Still counts, she whispered. As the car pulled away, the cabin faded behind them. But what remained was clearer than ever. A tradition reborn, not from duty, but from choice. For Tom Brady, the championships, records, and accolades would always be part of his story. But none of them compared to this quiet victory, the kind you don't celebrate with confetti, but with connection. And for Ben, the story wasn't about stepping into anyone's shadow, but about lighting a path of his own, one rooted in truth, shaped by a father who finally showed him the way by walking beside him. If this story moved you, take a moment to subscribe to our channel. We tell stories that matter, stories that bring us closer to what's real. And before you go, click on the video suggested on your screen. It's one you won't want to miss.